It's just iced tea. No worries. Are we going to black, Luis? We doing what we've been doing? Are you doing Rolex?
There's a sense of urgency that we all must do something.
We shouldn't feel defeated.
We can do it.
Perpetual planet means protecting nature as if our lives depend on it.
We have to keep hope alive.
How can we use our skills to solve these global problems?
I love for my research to have an impact in the life of people.
It takes a collective effort from all of us to inspire, to educate.
Putting all the knowledge together.
Más gente involucrada, más gente.
We are not going to stop until we get the job done.
It was just the beginning.
Fantastic.
Good evening. Welcome to the Explorers Club, to the last night of Climate Week. I'm Alex Moore. I'm the chair of the Climate Week program and also a director here, and I'm also a climate and health scientist and economist. I wanted to, how many of you have been here before? Okay, quite a few. For those who haven't been here before, this club was founded in 1904 by polar explorers to bring back the fragility and the stories, the wildlife of the Arctic and Antarctic and the third pole in the MLA as back to urban populations that knew nothing about it, and convey how important these places were. And we continue to do that today. It is our mission to communicate science, talk to people about nature and how important it is to all our collective lives. I'd like to acknowledge that the Explorers Club is located in Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral homeland of the Lenape people. The name Manhattan comes from their word Mannahatta, and we acknowledge the displacement of this region's original inhabitant and the Lenape diaspora that exists today. I would also like to acknowledge all our staff, and I will do that again when we close. But without further ado, I would like to welcome Kurt Caswell, who will be moderating this evening's very esteemed series of speakers. Kurt. Excuse me. Forgot my drink.
Good evening. My name is Kurt Caswell. I'm a writer and professor, a teacher at Texas Tech University in the Honors College. I'm also co-editor with Jim Warren of a relatively new book titled Going to Sea, 30 Writers on Nature, Inspiration, and the World of Barry Lopez. In this book, at least initially, it's this book that at least initially gathered this group tonight, as most of us are contributors. And I understand that Barry Lopez was a member of the Explorers Club and a sometimes speaker before this audience. As many of you know, we lost Barry in 2020. As the book's title indicates, Barry lived a life of exploration. He was driven to go and to see. And what he saw, he gave back in service to all of us, and to the earth, and to planetary justice. This book, Going to Sea, celebrates him and his way of life. So I thought I could help out tonight by giving you some context for the book and set in motion a river of voices tonight in service to the earth. I grew up on the Mackenzie River in Oregon, where Barry lived most of his life. I didn't know him then, but I began to read his work when I was 12 years old. And then one of the great accidents of my life, in the fall of 2005, I accepted a professorship at Texas Tech in the Honors College, where Barry's papers are housed in the Sowell collection, and where he was then serving as the university's first distinguished visiting scholar. So I had the great fortune to spend the last 15 years of Barry's life working closely with him when he was on campus. And I count him one of the great teachers and mentors in my life. Barry first became acquainted with Texas Tech in 1999 when the university proposed that he help to establish an archive of American writers whose subject is primarily human communities and the natural world. Barry said yes, and the Sowell Family Collection in Literature, Community, and the Natural World was born. You may have heard that Barry's literary papers were lost in the Holiday Farm Fire in September 2020. That is true, but only his remaining papers were lost, including some 50 years of his personal journals. But at Texas Tech, we have 300 linear feet of Barry's papers, along with the papers of some 30 other writers, including Susan Brind Morrow and Bill McKibben, who are here with us tonight. In imagining this book going to sea, I felt strongly that a collection of essays by writers who worked alongside Barry might be at least a small gesture toward healing the grief many of us felt in losing him. And I hope the book might be an entrance to his work and the work of its contributors for new generations of readers and writers. Macbeth, Shakespeare's Macbeth, is a fierce and powerful individual, but he cannot create. He is impotent, marked in the play by his failure to have children. So he hides his weakness and shame in acts of cruelty and murder. It works for a while, but soon enough, the walls come down around him. Angus, a nobleman of Scotland, says of him, "Those he commands move only in command, nothing in love. Now does he feel his title hang loose about him like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief." The countermeasure to Macbeth's impotence is creativity, or let's call it art. I want to share with you a passage by the Polish poet and Nobel laureate Czesław Miłosz, a passage I've heard Barry share with audiences several times. It's from a book called Roadside Dog. On the one side is luminosity, trust, faith, the beauty of the earth. On the other side, doubt, unbelief, the cruelty of the earth, the capacity of people to do evil. When I write, the first side is true. When I do not write, the second is. Thus, I have to write to save myself from disintegration. I would leave it here in silence around those words, but I want to share a brief story about Barry, and perhaps another way to save ourselves from disintegration. In the spring of 2016, I gave a reading at the Sowell Conference at Texas Tech. And when I finished, Barry came up to me and gave me a big hug, a big Barry hug. And he held me for a long time. And then he said, I don't know how much longer I'll be around, but it's okay because you're still here. Then he opened a space between us and he looked me in the eye and he said, do you understand what I mean? And what I understood him to have meant is not about me, but about all of us. It's okay, he was saying, because after he is gone, we will still be here to carry on. We will be here to hold things together. So thank you for gathering here tonight. Thank you for holding things together. And thank you for welcoming this group of writers into your company. Now I'd like to introduce briefly Susan Brind Morrow. Susan Morrow is the author of The Names of Things and a new book that came out with Texas Tech University Press called Water. She is a gracious person and she helped make tonight possible. Please welcome Susan Morrow.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here at the Explorers Club. So Kurt was the editor on this book and wrote the introductions. So I'm going to read something from it, but I did want to say that I still remember when Barry called me in 2005 and asked if I would be part of this idea that he had about the Sowell collection and how he was working. I believe at the time he was talking to E.O. Wilson. They were trying to figure out how to put together a curriculum for students that combined the sciences, in the sense of empirical science, and the arts. And I must say, I think that it really came together at Texas Tech. I just can't say enough about it. And so this book, Water, which came out of my archive there, really, it is a book that has poems and paintings and drawings in it. And it's just really following water, starting with the ocean and going through the Great Lakes to the Sud in Sudan and, just all over the place, both ideas about water, the connection of water with women, and the idea of heaven as a wetland in antiquity. And so I'm just going to read something from this and then something that engages the New York community with this subject, New York City community. Fresh water. Lake Superior is raised over the heart of this country like an angel's wing. Although it is an inland sea, its blue is not the cold steel blue of the ocean, but a kind of rich cornflower blue. As suddenly seen over the rim of a hill, one cannot quite believe how vast this rich blue is, the largest expanse of fresh water on the planet Earth. In winter, waves approach the shore, and unlike ocean waves, they freeze into hard white mountains of flaking ice. When I think of the lakes of my childhood, the Great Lakes, they conjure a sense of both sweetness and wildness at once. Beyond Chicago and Buffalo and Detroit, this territory of the great freshwater reserves of the world is for the most part unsettled and unsought, like a secret treasure long ago forgotten. As Pindar wrote 2,500 years ago, and as true today as it was then, Ariston menhudor, the most precious thing is water. After that comes gold. So I'm from the Finger Lakes, which is part of the Great Lakes system. They're connected. They're just south of Lake Ontario, and the water is connected throughout. So we've seen first the lamprey eel come in when I was a child, fastening on the lake trout there, affecting the fishing industry in the lakes, and then the zebra mussel, of course. But this is a subject that I think the New York City community is not aware of, and it has to really do with New York City. So I wrote this for The Nation in 2022. In the Finger Lakes region was settled just after the Revolutionary War by a person with long dark hair, eyes of startling intensity, and the voice of a man. Jemima Wilkinson, dubbed the public universal friend, was stoned by an angry mob in Philadelphia and went north with a group of followers to an area of deep blue lakes and agricultural land richer than anyone had ever seen. Within 100 years, the Finger Lakes had become host to the Reformed Quakers, the Underground Railroad, the abolition movement, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. When Stanton was barred from an abolitionist meeting because she was a woman, she started the women's rights movement in Seneca Falls. The people protesting climate change in the streets might want to highlight the environmental travesty that is Seneca Falls today. New York City's trash and sewage sludge is hauled here, 314 miles up the New York State Thruway, in giant diesel trucks spewing black exhaust all day long. Locating the state's largest garbage dump here, a site filled with historical meaning for the women's movement, is an act of sacrilege, a rape of the landscape, making the Seneca Meadows landfill emblematic of the connection between indifference to women's rights and the abuse of the earth. Each day, Seneca Meadows receives up to 6,000 tons of garbage, producing massive amounts of methane, and up to 100,000 gallons of leachate water, which is piped into the Finger Lakes after being fed through a local processing plant, some of it tucked away, some of it standing in leachate ponds, and thanks to the area's characteristically heavy rains and snows, ends up in the lakes anyway. The Finger Lakes are all connected to one another and to the Great Lakes by canals, wetlands, and natural waterways. As the lamprey eel and the zebra mussel have demonstrated, it doesn't take long for a single import to damage the entire ecosystem. So this has been something going on up there. Of course, you don't see it. You know, what you see is a mountain, but this is just one of several land fills in the Great Lakes region. And the reason they're there is the fresh water. And so the reason I'm reading this today is, I think I wrote this right after Bill de Blasio actually had under contract a train system to be built to just bring the New York City garbage up there all the time. And now some of it's going to Rochester and Lake Ontario region. But I think I'm just going to wrap it up by saying that, you know, there's a lot of talk about climate, environment, and so on, but that the role of individual consumers and people putting things in the trash, I mean, for example, here, batteries, things like that, just so that people know that this is what's happening and that these things are going into the freshwater reserves of the country. And you know, we wanted to highlight some of the things that people should be thinking about, and so I think this is certainly one of them. And I wish I could end on a positive note. Unfortunately, this particular landfill was scheduled to be closed in 2025, but instead the town board has just voted to have it extended indefinitely, I think to something like 2040, and expanded by 50 acres or something like that. So I've just seen, and I know this is happening all over the place, and I know that, you know, Terry and Bill know a lot more about this than I do, but I've seen what local people are up against and how hard these local fights are to have any say in what happens with these, you know, which, I mean, this is a large corporate interest. But anyway, I think I'll stop it there, except to say that the Finger Lakes and the Great Lakes are still among the most, you know, beautiful places in the country, and that the preciousness of the water there, everyone should be, you know, mindful of it and know that it's going to be really one of the most precious resources going forward. I mean, I remember speaking at the Cell Conference 10 years ago with Gary Napon from the University of Arizona, their food and water security chair there, about the land aquifer, about the aquifers drying up in the West, water crisis there. And so, anyway, I think I will stop right there and have Kelsey come up.
Thank you, Susan. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Kelsey Leonard, who is a water scientist, a legal scholar, a policy expert, a writer, and a citizen of the Shinnecock Nation, who I am just meeting today for the first time. Please welcome Kelsey.
Well, thank you so much, Akwe Unikasek. It's good to be with you all today in such a wonderful, full room. It's also such an honor to be amongst this distinguished panel. Definitely don't have much of the CV that these folks do, so it's just wonderful to be in their presence. I thought I'd start with a bit of a reading and then a letter of homage to Barry. Struck. We lost a relative this past weekend. They found him dead on the beach. He had been beaten brutally, struck. He was full-bodied. He was 28. 28 feet long. A humpback whale, 17. He was the 17th humpback whale to die this year in our waters. It's only May. We weren't allowed to claim the body. Morning. Struck. Morning struck. Bodies turned skeletons, beaches turned graveyards. Struck. Struck by how our world continues to kill the sacred. Struck by boats. Struck by greed. Struck by you. Our last breath struck. So, as was mentioned in the introduction, I am from the Shinnecock Nation. Our ancestral territory is located on the east end of what's currently known as Long Island, New York. And that was a true story of one of our relatives that passed away in May of 2023. Unfortunately, it continues what the federal government likes to call an unusual mortality event, but what we know to be a dying race of extinction for our right whale relatives, as well as humpback whales and other whale kin. So I am honored to be here to share these stories with you and to share them at a place like the Explorers Club, a place that carries so many stories of where we've been and where we imagine we might go. Our panel today asks, where are we going now that it's come to this? It's a question Barry Lopez wrestled with throughout his life, and it's one that resonates deeply with me as an Indigenous scholar and as someone who writes about water, climate, and justice. Barry once said he was often asked, "Why do you do this? Write about these places?" His answer was never simple. It was layered with humility and urgency. For me, the answer begins with my people, the Shinnecock. In our language, that means people of the stony shore. And with the waters that cradle our homelands, I write because the ocean remembers. I write because our stories are not separate from the land and water. They are the land and water. And I wonder if in creating Ronald in Horizon, Barry had heard of the stories of Shinnecock whalers, our men who built the ships in Sag Harbor, who were whalers and captains circumnavigating the world, and yet who returned home to find they were not even citizens. Many of them met their demise in 1876 when they were held at gunpoint to remain on a ship to secure cargo. For Indigenous peoples, we do not have to imagine stories of far-off lands. These stories have been passed down to us. They ache and live in our hearts. Barry also warned us we're in far greater danger of seeing the end of our cultural lives because of problems related to artificial intelligence and the internet. That's the most dangerous and creepiest thing on the horizon, and I think it's going to do us in before environmental damage does, he said. As someone who works on the intersection of Indigenous knowledge and emerging technologies, I feel the truth of this. Climate change is not a distant threat. It is an everyday reality for my people. But the erosion of our cultural lives, our relationships, our languages, our ways of knowing is being accelerated by the digital world that we live in today. Barry called it an important turning point to resist the pathology of consumerism, whether you're buying something in a store or demanding that your travel agent send you to a place nobody's ever been before, except Indigenous people. I often think about what that means for those of us gathered here, many of us explorers or writers of exploration. It means we must restore exploration. Discovery does not only happen in far-off land. It happens in the places where we have deep connection, where our ancestors have already traveled, where the land and water still waits to listen. In my own experience walking with Indigenous water walkers, I've learned what Barry described about traveling with Indigenous peoples. Nobody says much of anything while they're on the move because language collapses experience into meaning, and if you do it too soon, you've lost all the other meaning that would have been there. When walking for the water, no one speaks. The water speaks. We were simply present, prayerful witnesses to beauty as well as to harm. We resisted collapsing experience into easy meaning. That silence was also a form of writing for nature, a way of inscribing our bodies and prayers into the landscape. Barry once said at the heart of any good so-called nature writing, what I've come to learn is a term he abhorred, is the issue of social justice. And I agree. Climate change is the greatest social justice issue of our time. It is not a green scam. It is the rising waters that are forcing my community and many other coastal Indigenous peoples to drown in place while the wealthy retreat to what little higher ground remains in our sacred hills for your summer homes and weekend escapism in the so-called Hamptons. This is the landscape of injustice on which we write. I often wonder what Barry would say today about the victories and the unfinished work. In Of Wolves and Men, Barry described the appalling American slaughter of wolves, a long and ongoing vendetta driven by economic and political motives and by a quality of hatred that humans usually reserve for one another. And this persisted even beyond when that book was first published. Thankfully, a few years back, through Indigenous leadership, tribes in Wisconsin stopped the culling of gray wolves and later signed the Wolves Treaty to protect Mayingan, a sacred relative. This is one of the examples of the growing movement of Earth Law of which I am a part. I like to think of Earth Law as a tree, and there are many branches on that tree of this legal movement. One that you all may be familiar with, of rights of nature, but also the rights of future generations, Indigenous law, animal law, and so many more. And so I think for Barry's affinity for whales and other marine life, he'd probably be rallying behind the Princess of Tonga and other Pacific Island nations as they raise their call for the recognition of the rights of whales. I wonder if Barry would also be championing the recent call for the rights of Antarctica, a place he loved dearly. And perhaps the rights of nature more broadly, as many of you in this room are as allies with me. And so I think, yes, I think Barry would be one of our future, if not current, Earth lawyers. I never had the chance to meet Barry. I came to his work later than I wish, a whole nother speech to give about American and North American education systems. I came to his work later than I wish I had, but reading him now and preparing for this panel, I realized that what he called writing about places is really about writing love stories for our planet, for our people, for our more than human kin. That is the kind of writing that has always sustained us as Indigenous peoples. And that, I think, is where we're going. We're going forward to a world where writing, like exploration, is an act of kinship and care, not conquest. Stories make us who we are. They are not simply about animals or rivers or icebergs or far-off places. They are about relationships, reciprocity, responsibility, reverence. They teach us how to belong. So tonight, in Barry's memory, I invite us all to pause before we write, to sit in the silence, to resist collapsing experience into easy meaning, and to ask, are we telling stories that deepen our belonging or stories that further our estrangement? Because our words, like our footprints, are a part of the legacy we leave on this earth. Thank you to Barry, and thank you to you all. Tabutin.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. That was beautiful. Next is Terry Tempest Williams, who probably is best known for her book Refuge, but she's written many other books since then. And she's also a teacher and an activist and has had a love affair with the desert Southwest and the earth for her whole life. And she's an inspiring speaker and a deeply ethical person. Please welcome Terry Tempest Williams.
Good evening. Thank you, Alex. I can't see you, but thank you for having us here, and Kurt for bringing us together. I agree with what Barry said to you. And to Susan, the power of your voice, your poetry. And Kelsey, when you said that you had not met Barry, you met Barry. And I can't remember hearing a voice as powerful as yours in a very, very long time. And I really honor what you gave to us tonight. It's a pleasure to meet you. And to Bill, we've known each other 40 years. And now more than ever, your voice of the sun, recently challenged by our president, you're doing your work. And we all bless you. It's a privilege to be here with you. The last time I was here at the Explorers Club was with Barry many decades ago when he spoke. I met Barry in 1979. I was 25 years old, and my life changed in that friendship. He taught me how to drive in the dark, literally. And in Oregon, I remember we were in the woods and we were driving. He was driving very quickly, and he turned off the headlights, and we drove home in the dark. It's a powerful metaphor. It's as powerful a metaphor as I know for what writing is, especially now. But I think that what I'm left with Barry's absence, which is his presence, is his devotion to gesture. And that's really what I would ask us to think about tonight. What is the essential gesture that Nadine Gordimer was talking about, that Barry devoted his life to, especially now in these uncertain times? In the story Drought, I think it's my favorite story of Barry's, particularly as a member of the Southwestern communities where we are in a mega drought that has not been seen for 2,500 years. In his story Drought, Barry Lopez shows us how a single act born out of love and a desire to help had the power to bring forth rain in times of drought. If someone was, quote, foolish enough to dance the dance of the long-legged bird, I would exhort the river, the narrator said. And that word from Barry, I would exhort you, he always would say. And then quote from this story, "With no more strength than there is in a bundle of sticks, I tried to dance the dance of the long-legged bird who lived in the shallows. I danced it because I could think of nothing more beautiful." And with a turn of his page, we learned, a person cannot be afraid of being foolish, for everything, every gesture is sacred. We cannot worry about being foolish in this moment in time. Never has that foolishness, dancing the dance of the long-legged bird, mattered more, especially to writers who work on the page and in the world. For me, the essential gesture is home. Each of us belong to a community that inspires us, that asks everything of us, that is not easy because we're known. And last year, in our small community of Castle Valley, Utah, of about 250 people, we had 5 flash floods in a matter of weeks. It undid our community, and we had to rely on each other. And we are not of like minds, I can tell you that. But when you have a body of water coming so quickly, so ferociously, you bond together deeply. And I think what came through to us is, are we going to say that our community was devastated, or are we going to say that our community was transformed? And we've chosen the latter. I remember our neighbors. One of them, Shar and Roy, they have a big poster of MAGA and an American flag in front of their home. And next to them is Richard and Jolene, and they are LDS Mormons. Brooke and I are viewed as rabid environmentalists, but in that moment we took care of each other. And I remember when Richard and Jolene and Shar and Ray picked us up, they were in an amphibian in the desert, which is why you want Mormons as neighbors. And as we were driving to the town meeting with our mayor, who was born there, who said, this is not my problem. It's states' rights, it's your rights, you can do with what you want. It was Shar who stood up in the meeting and said, it can no longer be about taking care of ourselves, it has to be about taking care of each other. Very quickly, I want to share a story of what happened. Everyone on our street, where the flood hit the hardest, right next to us, and the flood came within 30 feet of our home, they moved. They just got up and left. And a new young couple moved in, and I wondered if they knew what happened. So Brooke and I thought, let's have a dinner party. I don't know what possessed us, but we invited our neighbors, and we thought, let's just call this a difficult dinner party with love. And we invited the 2 new neighbors. They're in their 30s. We invited the Williams and Shar and Ray, and we invited some environmental friends who make me look like Nancy Reagan, and Flint Napper. And so we had a very diverse group for Salt Lake, you know, in the Utah area, down by Moab, around our dinner table. I was nervous. When I called, the Mormons wanted to know what we were serving. Ray and Shar wanted to know who was coming. Our rabid environmentalist friends asked if it was locally sourced. And so it went. When they came, we handed them some stones in the shape of hearts. It's the Mormon in me. And before we got to the dinner table, we had each person talk about what they loved about Castle Valley. It took an hour. And in that hour, I realized we were absolutely sharing the same thoughts. The dinner went well. We talked about origin stories for the new neighbors. And then it was Richard, the Mormon patriarch, who said, I have one question about our community and the floods. Where does the water want to go? And that shifted everything. The table was cleared, maps came out, and what was brought forth from this difficult dinner party of what we thought, you know, none of us had anything in common except for everything, our home. We decided to have a community gathering called Walking the Path of Water. I think of your story, Kelsey. And we put out a poster. We said, you know, we have gone through something together. Do you want to walk with us the path of water down Placer Creek? We didn't know if we'd have 12 people. We didn't know if we'd have 1. We didn't know if we'd have 30. That morning, Brooke and I went to the Mormon church and put the chairs around. We got 12. We thought a dozen would be well. Over 70 people showed up in our community. And we walked that path of water. It took 3 hours. And in that 3 hours, our community came together in a way that I haven't seen in the 30 years we've lived there. What was the essential gesture? I think the essential gesture is to look at our neighbors, no matter how on paper it looks like we have nothing in common, no matter at this point in time when our president tells us we are at war with each other. We are of common ground. To use Barry's words, home ground. Barry's very presence incited beauty, even as his beloved trees in Finrock burned to ash in the fires that engulfed the Blue River community in the fall of 2020. His eyes were focused on the ground and the name of the work that was now his. In his words, our last conversation, he said, "The recovery and restoration of our home." That phrase he used in our last correspondence, even as he understood death was coming, was one that has stayed with me. Our home. The recovery and restoration of our home. The recovery and restoration of our democracy. What is the essential gesture? In one of his last essays, Love in a Time of Terror, he wrote, "In this moment, it is still possible to face the gathering darkness and say to the physical earth and to all its creatures, including ourselves, fiercely and without embarrassment, I love you," and to embrace fearlessly the burning world. I return to his story of the drought. Perhaps the only gesture that we have right now is love, especially in this time of uncertainty and chaos, where what we are witnessing is the open space of democracy closing. Everyone has to learn how to die, Barry writes. That song, that dance alone and in time. To stick your hands in the river is to feel the chords and bind the earth together. Barry is with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. As Terry was talking, I realized that we basically have the same haircut. I'd like to introduce Bill McKibben. He is the premier voice on global climate change, the author of The End of Nature, a landmark book on that subject, and the author of a new book, Here Comes the Sun. And I hope you enjoy hearing from him. Welcome, Bill.
Owner of a very different haircut. Yeah. First of all, it's very good to be at the Explorers Club. I've been coming here for a very long time. In the early 1980s, when I was in my early 20s, I wrote the Talk of the Town column for the New Yorker. And sometimes I'd come up here and cover events of one kind or another. And I always remember, of course, walking up the staircase past that polar bear. And at one remove, it's a little sad to think of that great creature wrenched out of the Chukchi Sea and made to spend the rest of his existence on the Upper East Side. And on the other hand, a useful purpose, because it would seem bad to utter really insignificant thoughts in the presence of a creature as magnificent as that. I want to talk about, actually, exploration for a moment. On Christmas Eve last year, the fastest object that humans have ever propelled, the Parker Solar Probe, made the closest approach to the sun of anything that we've ever sent into space, went whipping past at 400,000 miles an hour, many, many times faster than a bullet fired from a gun. So close that though it was only there briefly, its wiring had to be shielded with sapphire to keep it from just melting in the intense heat. And it brought back staggering images, news of the solar winds and the flares emanating off the most charismatic object in our corner of the universe, our local star. We don't know how people a very long time ago, for whom we have lost the oral tradition, thought exactly about the world, but we have a pretty good sense because every time we find a collection of stones or things someplace, they're oriented towards the solstice or the equinox. And as soon as we start finding stories in cultures, almost the first job of people is to figure out how to explain the fact that this thing rises each day on one side of us and sets in the evening and somehow by the next morning has made its way back around. The extraordinary power of the sun, the tropism that we and all other things have in the direction of the sun, is for me the one good thing happening right now on this planet that otherwise is experiencing an extraordinary number of very bad things. I won't dwell on them at great length, except to say that the climate is now disintegrating in real time around us. The things that I was warning about 40 years ago unhappily have played out more or less as the scientists said they would, though a little bit faster and a little bit larger. The atmosphere around us holds considerably more water vapor than it did, which means that in arid areas we're seeing evaporation and drought, and then we're seeing fire so often that it almost now doesn't register. It was only 8 months ago that the second largest city in this country lost huge neighborhoods to an almost unbelievable blaze, and that's almost disappeared down the memory hole already. Once that water is up in the air, it comes down in extraordinary flood, place after place after place. We're in a city that just a few years ago had its worst rainstorms ever recorded, and numbers of New Yorkers, mostly immigrants, died in the basement apartments of the 5 boroughs because they were flooded before anyone could escape. And of course, we live in a country that all of a sudden is watching the democracy that we took too much for granted flicker and falter before our eyes. It was just 48 hours ago that the buffoon president of this country, a few blocks away, gave what has to have been the stupidest speech in the history of the United Nations, insisting that climate change was a hoax and a scam. And one wonders how because they're diplomats, the representatives of the countries that are vanishing beneath the rising oceans, were able to just sit there and listen to this. Amidst all those big bad things, the one big good thing that is going on, and it is very big and very good, maybe big and good enough to take a bite out of both the climate and the authoritarianism crisis, is this sudden, sharp rise in renewable, clean energy around this planet. In the last 36 months, we've seen truly amazing change. What we used to call alternative energy is all of a sudden the common sense, obvious, straightforward way to power the planet. We live on an Earth where the cheapest way to make power now is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. What an extraordinary gift that is. Human beings have been setting things on fire for at least 700,000 years, the archaeologists tell us. Mostly that's good. We learned to cook food. It gave us the big brain. We could move north and south from the equator. No one was living at this latitude before fire. The anthropologists tell us that standing around the campfire for eons every night probably helped develop the social bonds that mark our species. It was a kind of proto-Zoom, you know. And then came the Industrial Revolution, and we learned to control the combustion of coal and gas and oil, and that was modernity. That was all around us. But the price is so high now. The destruction of the climate system, the fact that 9 million people a year die, 1 death in 5 on this planet, from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. There are 5 million school children in New Delhi. 2.5 million of them have irreversible lung damage from breathing the air. And the fact that since we depend on a fuel source that's only available in a few places, the people who control those places end up with insane amounts of power and wealth, which they then routinely abuse in all kinds of ways. The idea that we're now in a place where that could yield to, well, where energy from hell could give way to energy from heaven, is a very beautiful possibility, filled with potential for creating a world not just that survives, but that works very differently and very much better than the one that we've lived on. I was thinking of Kelsey's gorgeous and powerful poem about the struck whale. 50% of all the ship traffic on planet Earth is just carrying coal and oil and gas back and forth across the planet to be burnt, a task that the sun is happily willing to perform every single day for free. A boatload of solar panels in its lifetime will produce 500 times as much energy as a boatload of coal or gas or oil. We have the possibility for an extraordinary liberation if we choose to see it. It's not an entirely free lunch. You have to mine stuff to make it happen, but you have to mine far, far less than you do at the moment. Our friend Amory Levin's Rocky Mountain Institute last fall put out a report saying all the minerals needed for the battery renewable transition by 2050 was less than the volume of coal we mined last year on this planet. So the possibility of running the world on energy that's available to everyone, everywhere in their communities is magnificent. Of all Barry's projects, the one that I liked best, the one that I enjoyed he was a great doer of projects and convener of people. And my favorite was his dictionary of geographical terms that he enlisted many of us to do. I liked it for its remarkable specificity. I like nouns. I like hard, flinty, real things more than I like abstract concepts and ideas. And that's what I think about when I think about the moment that we're in right now. We have this possibility of a new relationship with the world around us. Again, the sun already gives us light and warmth, and via photosynthesis, our dinner, and now willing to provide all the power that we could ever use. And so it's like an exam question. Are we going to choose this in time? Because we have to do it like an exam very quickly, or it won't matter. Yeah, we'll run the world on sun and wind in 30 years because of economics, but if it takes us 30 years to get there, the world we run on the sun and wind will be a completely broken one. We're already flirting with the absolute outer edge of what the planet can sustain. The jet stream, which runs on the temperature difference between the equator and the poles, is now wobbling because the poles are so much warmer. The Gulf Stream, the great currents of the Atlantic, 100 times the flow of the Amazon River, is now flickering and faltering like our democracy because there's so much fresh water pouring out of a melting Arctic that it's disrupting those differences in salinity and hence density that drive the great currents of the seas. We only have a few years to do what we can to save what we can. We can't stop global warming. It's far too late for that. But we may still be able to stop it short of the place where it cuts civilizations completely off at the knees. Every 1/10 of a degree Celsius that we warm the planet moves another 100 million of our brothers and sisters out of a safe climate zone into a dangerous one. So the idea that we could shave 1/10 of a degree, maybe many 1/10 of a degree, off the eventual temperature of the Earth by making a quick transition off fossil fuel, that's beautiful. And up against it is only the greed that was manifest in that speech at the UN the other day, when the president kept talking in the most direct terms about his desire for dominance, for energy dominance, to control the rest of the world, to bring people to heel, to have them under his thumb, our thumb, or the alternate vision, which he hates with a passion because it goes against every instinct of his narcissistic soul. We could rely on a shared source of energy available to everyone all the time that can't be hoarded or held in reserve. Humans are good at fighting wars, but they'll struggle to figure out how to fight one over sunshine, And so the moment just seems so pregnant with such great possibility for both good and ill. And the iconography, almost too obvious. The idea that we need to turn toward the light and away from the oily dark. So powerful and compelling, but so difficult given the balance of power that exists now. So I'll just leave you with the fact that last weekend we had what we called Sunday for the first time. And 500 or so places across this country, people rallied for precisely that vision of the world, a world that might run more easily. And we're going to need to do this many more times in the very near future. We're going to need to demand over and over again this change. And that, I think, in the end, was much of the vision that Barry really had. Barry was a writer. He was a complicated writer and often a complicated speaker. There were times when I'd have long phone conversations with Barry and be not at all clear what we'd talked about in the course of those conversations. But he understood at a very deep level that it was going to require movements of people standing up for a different future to make that future happen. And he did more than anyone else to rally the community of nature writers, as it were, behind that. And hence, this panel today is the great memorial that one could ask for him, because it has these remarkable writers and all of you in a room to think about how to make real and quick the changes that he understood at some very deep and intuitive level were absolutely necessary for us to be, not only to survive, but to be the creature that we are capable of being, I think. We shall see.
How about that? Bill's latest book is outside for your perusal and purchase. This is the last session of record-breaking Climate Week program at the Explorers Club. If you ever are interested in the madness that is the creation of this program, buy me a drink. I will tell you. It could not be possible without our staff, and we do have a party after this, and I will have a moment to actually acknowledge each one of them. But they are outstanding, and they are few, and this is a charity, so no one here is getting rich talking about climate or greenwashing, as may be the case elsewhere this week. And that's probably why we find comfort in this place. The reason why we had these fantastic writers tonight, as you might have noticed, is that one of our esteemed members passed away recently, and I was just taken aback by the eloquence that was shared in this room. But it also shocked me that, and I will take the privilege of the chair to take 2 minutes to end on this note, that to write as they do, and to say what they do, what they say today, takes an enormous amount of courage, particularly as we are seeing our freedom of saying what we think eroded every day, especially in a world that works on tweets and 250 characters. Is it 250 characters? I don't know. To have the courage to write and speak in words that are longer than 5 letters, and to put a few of them in an eloquent string for the audience to listen to and perhaps change minds is truly a profile in courage. And I'm using my own Commonwealth's representative I'm just paraphrasing from John Kennedy. It is profile in courage. And oddly, I was thinking that these are profiles in courage right here. As they are, as all speakers are. It takes courage to stand here and tell the truth about science and communicate stories about what's happening far away from a city that is mostly protected from the ravages of climate change. And that is what we do at the Explorers Club. We tell stories about places that are far away to hopefully change minds and behaviors to make this, to maintain this world as beautiful as it is. So thank you for coming tonight. Please stick around for the reception, and please consider supporting this program for next year. Take care.